Dude, I need to share something surreal that happened to me when I was working as security at Allianz Parque in São Paulo. It was October 2023, on a Wednesday night after a Palmeiras game. I'm Carlos, and I've been working as security in stadiums for 8 years, but I had never witnessed anything like this. That night, Neymar was visiting the stadium after the game for a special recording. It was around 11:40 p.m. and I was doing my normal rounds in the west section. The stadium was practically empty, with only a few cleaning and production teams still working. Suddenly, I received a call over the radio. It was João, my supervisor, saying that Neymar had disappeared. Yes, you heard it right, disappeared. His team was frantically searching everywhere. He had gone to the bathroom near the locker rooms and hadn't returned. Immediately, we started a search throughout the stadium. The security cameras showed him entering the bathroom at 11:35 p.m., but they didn't capture his exit. It was as if he had evaporated. The strangest part was that this particular bathroom had always been known among the staff for unexplained happenings. Some colleagues had reported strange noises, doors slamming shut on their own, and even shadows. I had always been skeptical about these stories, but what happened that night completely changed my perspective. When I entered the bathroom to look for him, I immediately felt a change in temperature. It was absurdly cold, something totally abnormal for a warm October night in São Paulo. The lights started flickering, and I swear I heard distant laughter as if it was coming from the walls. The most frightening part was when we found Neymar's cell phone lying near the last stall. The screen was still on, showing a half-taken selfie that he apparently tried to take. In the photo, you could partially see a dark figure behind him. The entire security team was in a panic. It had been 40 minutes since his disappearance. We discreetly called in some paranormal experts who usually provide support to the stadium in, let's say, unusual situations. During the investigation, we discovered that that specific area of the stadium was built over an ancient indigenous cemetery. According to historical records, that land had a very strong energy and was considered sacred by the people who lived there in the 18th century. The experts began a spiritual communication process, while we kept everything absolutely confidential to avoid panic and unnecessary exposure. The situation was getting more tense, and time was not helping at all. The tension just kept rising. It was past midnight when we began to hear rhythmic knocks coming from the bathroom walls. The paranormal experts, Dona Celia and her son Marcos, lit candles and began a protection ritual. The atmosphere was so heavy that some security guards refused to stay in the area. Then something even weirder happened. The bathroom lights started flickering wildly, and a cold wind appeared out of nowhere, even with all the windows closed. The most astonishing thing was that we could clearly hear Neymar's voice calling for help, but it seemed to be coming from all directions at once. Dona Celia, a lady in her 70s with decades of experience in supernatural cases, explained that that place was a dimensional portal. According to her, at certain moments, especially during a full moon, which was the case that night, the barrier between our world and the spiritual one became thinner. The medium began to go into a trance and revealed that Neymar was trapped in a kind of parallel dimension, a place between worlds. According to her, the spirits of the ancient inhabitants of that land were testing him as a sort of rite of passage. Around 1:15 a.m., the bathroom lights went completely out. The cold became even more intense, to the point that we could see our own breath. That's when we began to hear an indigenous chant, quiet at first, but gradually increasing in volume. The electronic equipment started to malfunction. Walkie-talkies were only emitting static, cell phones were shutting down on their own, and the security cameras were showing only interference. Panic was setting in among everyone present. Marcos, Dona Celia's son, began to translate the chants echoing through the room. According to him, they were ancient prayers, speaking about trials and spiritual purification. It was as if the ancestral spirits wanted Neymar to undergo some kind of transformative experience. All this time, the players' team was in complete despair. We tried to keep the situation under control and confidential, but it was almost impossible to hide what was happening. Some cleaning staff passing by began to spread stories, and soon the buzz was spreading throughout the stadium. The most surreal was yet to come. Around 1:30 a.m., the bathroom walls began to sweat, dripping a viscous greenish liquid. The smell was a mix of wet earth and unknown herbs. Donna Celia stated that it was a sign that the portal was about to open again. The chanting grew more intense, and a bluish light began to emanate from the walls. It was something supernatural, unlike anything we had ever witnessed. The air became even denser, and a feeling of electric energy coursed through our bodies. It was at that critical moment that everything began to reach its climax. The bluish light intensified so much that we could barely keep our eyes open. Suddenly, we heard a deafening bang, as if something had broken the sound barrier, and then, out of nowhere, Neymar simply reappeared. He emerged exactly in the same stall where he had disappeared, lying on the floor, completely disoriented and gasping for breath. His clothes were intact, but there were indigenous symbols drawn on his arms with a natural ink that no one recognized. The most striking thing was his expression, a mix of fear and fascination that I will never forget. As soon as he managed to compose himself, Neymar began to recount his experience. According to him, he had been transported to a kind of ancient village where he encountered the spirits of indigenous warriors. They subjected him to a series of spiritual tests, assessing his humility, courage, and respect for the sacred land. It was like living 100 years in 2 hours, he said, still trembling. They showed me visions of the past, the present, and even some of the future. They made me understand the importance of that place, the ancestral energy that exists there. I will never be the same after this experience. Experts explained that cases like this, although extremely rare, have been documented in other places, built on sacred lands. What happened to Neymar was a kind of spiritual calling, something that ancient shamans used to do with chosen ones. The most curious thing is that when we later checked the security cameras, we discovered something even more intriguing. At the exact moment Neymar reappeared, all the stadium cameras captured a kind of aurora borealis inside the bathroom, something completely impossible to occur naturally in São Paulo. In the following days, we noticed significant changes in Neymar's behavior. He began to insist on performing gratitude rituals before games, started studying the history of Brazilian indigenous peoples, and even initiated a secret project for the preservation of sacred lands. The case was kept confidential for a long time, protected by confidentiality agreements signed by everyone present. But today, nearly 2 years later, with Neymar's own authorization, I can share this incredible story. The bathroom in question has been transformed into a kind of sanctuary, and it is still occasionally possible to hear indigenous chants echoing through its walls. Mrs. Celia continues to be the spiritual advisor of the stadium, and since then, other inexplicable events have been recorded at the site, although none as intense as what happened with Neymar. The symbols that appeared on his arms that night were studied by anthropologists and identified as belonging to a tribe that inhabited that region over 300 years ago. This experience completely changed my view of the supernatural. As a security guard, I learned to respect even more the history and energy of the places we protect. Allianz Parque is not just a football stadium. It is a portal between worlds, a place where the past and present meet in ways that science still cannot explain.